I love that Caesars. Each scene that unfolds in Mark 14 is a foreshadowing of the death of Jesus. We have the plotting of the Jewish leaders in verses 1 to 2, and the account of Judas's betrayal in verses 10 to 11 that we'll look at tomorrow. And sandwiched in between these accounts of malice and betrayal in verses 3 to 9 of Mark 14, we have this wonderful little story about the anointing of Jesus. Both dimensions of love are illustrated in the story. Two who receive it and two who give it away. First, we read that Jesus is in the home of Simon the leper. Whilst we are not explicitly told, there is every indication from the story that he's no longer a leper. In fact, there's every indication that in Jesus' eyes, he's just Simon, because Jesus had healed him. We can only surmise when. Perhaps he was the one Jesus healed after teaching his Sermon on the Mount. Perhaps he was the one of the 10 lepers who returned to say thank you. Perhaps he was simply one of the hundreds Jesus touched, of whom we are given no record. But one thing we do know, what he was like before he was touched by Jesus. He was covered with open, ulcerating sores, stooped shoulders, minus a few fingers, and a sign hanging from his neck with the scribbled words large and clear, saying unclean. We do not know how he came to invite Jesus to dinner in his home. Jesus, this wanted man from Galilee. But he didn't care, because Jesus had cared so much for him. He had experienced Jesus' love for him. He had felt his touch upon his life and been made whole. He had known what it was like to be ostracized from society, to feel loneliness and rejection and isolation, to stare death in the face, even to be thrown out of his own home. He would never forget that. And he would never forget what Jesus did for him. You can just picture the events that led to this moment, can't you? The commotion in the distance, the sounds of voices, his joy when he heard that it was Jesus passing through. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. Somehow to express his gratitude for what Jesus had done for him. And so he would invite Jesus to his home. He would not allow this opportunity to slip through his fingers. But isn't that what love does? It seizes the moment, it reciprocates, it acts, it risks everything. Love does not weigh the cost. Love sacrifices. And we can only wonder when Jesus knelt alone there in Gethsemane, contemplating the lashings upon his back and the crown of thorns on his brow, whether it was not this act of love, companionship, hospitality, that gave him the strength he needed to get through that dark night. A simple gesture, sure. But isn't it the simple gestures in life that we find most meaningful? That phone call, that card, that visit, that food parcel, that prayer, that affirmation, that word of encouragement, that blessing. we remember the parable that Jesus told. But Lord, when did I see you hungry? When did I see you thirsty? When were you a stranger? And the answer, whatever you did not do for the least of these, you did not do for me. Have you experienced such love lately? When last did you give it away? And so the first one who received love was Simon. But then we come to an uninvited guest, a woman. While they were having dinner, she comes in. Many think it was a Mary. Mark does not tell us. For us, it's simply an anonymous woman. She proceeded to break open a jar of costly perfume and pour this over Jesus' head in front of the other guests. Matthew tells us this perfume cost enough to feed over 5,000 people. Mark tells us that it was worth a year's wages. Perhaps it was the only thing of value that she owned. This was extravagance in the extreme. Yet it wasn't an impulse. It wasn't a spur of the moment thing. She had carried this expensive perfume from her home to the home of Simon, where she knew Jesus was staying. Why the anointing? It's not uncommon to anoint your guests at feasts in the ancient world, but it would normally be done with a cheap perfume or oil, not one as expensive as this. What else did this act of hers symbolize? What did it mean? Well, another possibility may allude to a practice of anointing we find in the Old Testament, where a king would often be anointed in his private quarters by a priest or a prophet as an act of setting him apart for some great conquest, usually signaling a revolt. In 2 Kings 9, we read about such an event. And so could it be here that this unknown woman anoints Jesus as Messiah in expectation that he would lead the revolt as a king against the rule of Rome? If so, is it not ironic that here is a woman who does the anointing, not a priest, not a prophet, and in the private quarters not of a king but of a leper? Caring for the poor was central to Judaism, and it was customary to remember the poor on special holy days. And so the disciples rebuked this woman for her extravagant waste. Jesus says, "Leave her alone. Why are you bothering her so? She has done something very beautiful and loving for me." Why was it so beautiful? Perhaps because she was not anointing an earthly king, but the King of Kings, who would die on a cross as the truly anointed Son of God. In this sense, her anointing symbolizes a preparation of his body for burial. Because when Jesus did die, none of those who claimed to love him were there to take down his body and anoint it for burial. He would be buried by a stranger, and he would be placed in a borrowed grave. But for now, he is anointed by one who does not only claim love, but demonstrates it. Whatever her motive, it was a demonstration of a love that seizes the opportunity. An account of extraordinary devotion, sandwiched between two accounts of extraordinary malice and betrayal, as is given in verse 1 and 11. Her devotion stands in stark contrast to Judas's betrayal. Judas seizes his moment, an opportunity to betray Jesus, to sacrifice Jesus for his own ends, and his act of treachery too will never be forgotten. This woman seizes an opportunity to show her love to Jesus. She too sacrifices all she has, but not for her own benefit, but for Jesus. And her act of devotion will also never be forgotten. Mark's readers would have understood the question. Why the waste? Something of great value was poured out on Jesus' head. And later Jesus ties this action to his coming death. And in the words of institution of the sacrament, he tells them that his blood will be poured out for many. The woman's pouring out of her costly perfume foreshadows the costliness of the pouring out of his blood. Why the waste, you may ask? The answer is found in the attitudes of those around him. They need to be saved. This is what the passion of Christ is all about, friends. It's about reflecting on God's extravagant love for you on the cross. It's about responding to that love. It's about seizing opportunities to demonstrate that love to others. Jesus announces that this woman's devotion will be remembered wherever the gospel is preached in the whole world. And this is why we still read about it. You see, acts of love are never forgotten. Maybe you can think of a time when somebody did something special for you that they didn't have to do. Maybe they traveled out of their way to come and see you because they cared. Or maybe they spent some time at your bedside while you were recovering from a surgery or an illness. Or maybe they met some need in your life that at the time seemed impossible. Or maybe they just made it possible for you to do something that you've always wanted to do. And so we could go on. The list is endless. But every time you remember those acts of love, it's like a fragrance of warmth and hope and comfort. So let me ask you, when was the last time you broke a vase?